Good afternoon and welcome to After Hours. Joining me today is Corinne Culbertson.
Correct. Yeah.
And you're a woman of many names.
True.
And I'm so glad you're here. And she's with the PHS Community Services Society. I guess I want to start. You're going to kind of bring me up to date with the past.
Okay.
So the Portland Hotel Society was originally...
It was a very small non-government organization founded by Liz Evans, Dan Small, Kirsten Stutzbacher, and Mark Townsend, just identifying the need for a place for people to exist outside of the institutionalized systems of care, like a forever home for folks that had...
I think housing was a major drive in those days.
That's very true, yep.
And talk a bit about Portland. Why Portland?
Well, our founders were inspired by a housing model that was very inclusive and innovative in Portland, Oregon. And therefore, that's how, I believe that's the story of how they landed on the Portland Hotel Society. But as we grew, there was a need for us to incorporate under a different name. So we are now the PHS Community Services Society.
So what kind of services at this point are you providing? There's a whole series of events.
Yeah.
I have many moons ago a memory of a conference held in Oppenheimer Park where people from around the world came to talk about harm reduction.
Yes, at a time when harm reduction was considered blasphemous or heretic, it was not an accepted practice. Mm-hmm. People thought we were enabling folks. And that was that was really inspired by one of our first major overdose crises and the HIV crisis in the downtown east side in the 90s. We were at that time having 1 death per day in our community. And everyone was scared and outraged. And again, like the downtown east side has always been a community that has had to look after itself first before there was any bigger intervention. So that was the community bringing all the stakeholders and together and sharing information and shouldering each other up and talking about harm reduction in a way that hadn't been done before.
I had spoke to people, well, there was many people there, but from Switzerland, from Germany, and in fact, in Germany, I believe it was the police that wanted to change the situation on the streets. And it was it was eye-opening in terms of help. And talk a bit about the community, because I think a lot of people don't see that area as having a strong community. It has a history of like City Hall being there.
That's right.
Co-op Radio was a bank building. Mm-hmm. Talk a bit about that.
Well, historically, that was even the financial district in the downtown of Vancouver. But as the financial district moved further west, that became the downtown east side, like in that main strip on Hastings. You think of all the hotels, which we now call single room occupancy hotels. They were hotels for like longshoremen and loggers, and Vancouver's a port city, so there was a lot of the trades folks that were transient, and that became their home. And the moneymaker was always the licensed saloon on the main floor. So often, as that neighborhood became less of like a centralized hub and more of a low-income, working-class neighborhood, those buildings sort of became decrepit because the landlords would invest, of course, in the bar, but not necessarily in the units upstairs. Right. So that's how the neighborhood got that gritty, run-down kind of look. But it's been, it's a community where we all know each other. You don't pass people by without saying hello. The agencies in that neighborhood have worked really hard to make sure everyone who enters the community knows how to respond to an overdose. Starting around mid-2015 when we saw the uptick of this horrendous hemorrhage of life in our neighborhood. So, I find the downtown east side a very cohesive, friendly, welcoming neighborhood. It's the most unpretentious neighborhood in Vancouver. Doesn't matter what you look like. People are happy to see you as you and not about what you're wearing or it's just very unpretentious and real. Of course, it's a community of great suffering. I'm not going to pretend like that doesn't exist, but what people are seeing isn't really the drug crisis or a drug issue in that neighborhood. What people are seeing is displacement, gentrification, and violent poverty. That's what it looks like. So it's not pretty, you know? You drive through on your way to work in the financial sector from Burnaby, and it's kind of shocking.
I used to sit in Pigeon Park, though, and I've read recently an interesting book, Five Little Indians, and it was really interesting to read because Native people from the kids, they were kids, 16, were taken to the downtown east side, and that was kind of an eye-opener for me because there was, I don't know if the population has changed, but a large Native Indigenous population. Yep. Talk a bit about that.
Well, we have a disproportionately high number of Indigenous folks accessing our services and homeless in the downtown east side. It's incredibly multicultural. There are people from across Turtle Island in downtown east side. Like, you know, we have some local folks, of course, as well. But there's lots of Cree and Assiniboine and lots of languages. And, you know, the displacement of Indigenous populations is been a colonial work in progress since like the middle 19th century or earlier. So it's what we're seeing is a result of that, just displacement. I see opportunity in it because there's so many wonderful ways to engage with Indigenous community members. And, you know, my role with the organization would always be to serve. So
talk a bit about that. So what?
My role is to serve. So I would be tasked with being responsible for a program called Culture Saves Lives, which is a revolutionary movement. It's fucking brilliant. It's this individual, Patrick Smith, who's an Indigenous fellow, had worked in harm reduction, was in recovery, had been in jail, done everything, like had a real comprehensive experiential education about the systems of care, the systems of violence. And it was just breaking his heart that folks who were still had substances on board, who were using alcohol or drugs, were not able to access their culture as medicine. You know, because a lot of communities, Indigenous communities, really didn't support harm reduction at one time. Like, you know, drugs and alcohol were weaponized against their communities. So it was a really difficult thing to sort of get a partnership on. And he started this movement called Culture Saves Lives and got a group together. And, you know, in the big East Van Cross, they would go in the night and hang a huge feather. Like, they were dropping giant medicine wheels and dream catchers off buildings in the night. And it just, like, suddenly the landscape of the downtown east side looked different. And then people started talking about culture as medicine. And we started having powwow in the downtown east side, things like that. And my role with that program was to just serve. So what do you need administratively? How can I help you increase your resources financially? You know, I always consider myself like the bridesmaid or the maid of honor in my work. Like, I'm here to carry your bags. What do you need? Like, you know, I'm going to
sort
open
of
the door
find
and carry your bags.
The places to go to get.
And it's a great honor to be in that role of servitude. And
what in your background has given you that skill and pleasure?
I don't know if I'm skilled. Okay. But, like, you know, honestly, it is an incredible, I'm not sure. I have some natural sensitivities through my upbringing, but I came to the work, you know, early on as an activist. But even then, like, when I first started with the PHS, I wasn't sure we were doing the right thing. You know, I was working in the hotels, working graveyards, and I was like, seems kind of crazy what we're doing. This is bananas around here. And then, like, 2 months, 3 months in, when I'd started building relationships with people and saw what the work was, I was completely radicalized. You grow to see people not as vectors of disease or as problems, because this community is very problematized by law enforcement, by, you know, systems of oppression, all the things. And when you're in a relationship and you're like, holy shit, that is like, you're one of my favorite people. Like, you know, sometimes you might commit petty theft and public nuisance, but I see so much more of you than that. And having the opportunity to be in relationship with people like that is, it's the good that comes out of it is reciprocal. I become a better person. I learn about myself and about others, and I am able to provide care because I've built trust. So it's great. You can't expect people to care for themselves or care for others in their community if they don't care for themselves. So much of the work, we do all sorts of technical things. We provide safe supply, we do but we can't do that if we don't have that basic first step, which is building trust in a relationship. You have to know how to welcome people in and how to work with them through some of the uncomfortable and difficult things.
That's a lot. And it brings a lot to mind for me because when I started alternative media, started at Co-op Radio, it was a radicalization for me to see a part of the real world and meet some of these people. I used to see I never knew her name. She was very on her own, the pigeon lady.
Oh yeah.
But she had pigeons around her. She took care of them. I don't know what her life was, but she was an incredibly giving, strong people. They're strong people too. That's the other thing that I've I think we tend to push them aside, but see them as weak, but they're strong people.
No one ends up in the downtown east side without surviving an enormous amount of adversary and possibly violence and possibly, no one ends up there that has a great, soft,
comfortable
launch in life. Yeah. And it's a very diverse community. We serve, the PHS serves a lot of Indigenous folks. We serve folks of color. We serve new immigrants that end up in the downtown east side. We serve elders. Oh gosh, yeah.
Mental health issues. Talk a bit about all
mental health consumers. Absolutely. The downtown east side is a place where you can be in the middle of the street with your pants down, and no one's going to be shocked or horrified. We're going to go, hey, is there anything we can do for you today? Maybe let's get you. This is a great dance you're doing. Maybe let's do it on the sidewalk. Not like call in the SWAT team. It's such a. It's like Vancouver is a very homogenous city. It's very conservative and it's very rich. And the downtown east side has got true grit and it's irreplaceable. It's a place, it's gritty and seasoned and colorful. And yes, again, like I've said, of course there's suffering and despair and we're not doing good enough. Yes, but it doesn't mitigate the fact that there is a beautiful community there. And there are a ton of people who really care about each other, who have relationships and families and, their cats have kittens and, I was at a wedding very recently of one of our peer staff, and it was one of the most magical events I've ever been at, on the roof of one of the social housing buildings, and we all came together, and I mean, it's
what
just
about the tragedies? Like, how hard or how do you take it with you? The losses, I'm sure you've known people who have died. Yeah. How do you deal with all of that?
Well, it's, and I think it's like this in life for everyone. One of the most important things I think that PHS brings to the community of the downtown east side is a commitment to memorializing people. We don't let people pass without some sort of ritual or ceremony. And that's a very important part in the grieving trajectory, and debriefing is really important. For me, having a life-work balance and having boundaries, which is, good boundaries is something we all work on our whole lives. And some years we get good, some years we're shit at it. But making sure that I have boundaries, and when there's been a death in the community, my role is to support the community and not be in my grief. I'm able to take that away and debrief that privately with other folks. I'm in a role of support. I cry in front of people in the downtown east side all the time, by the way, because we have great moments of joy and great moments of loss. So I think it's that human, we're all in it together. You know, we're all experiencing these terrible tragedies together. We lose, you know, we have some really bad months where we lose 3 or 4 people that are like very tightly connected to our community, or a resident. You know, some of the folks that we house, some of our resident population, I've known them for 21 years. Some of them I've grown up with. Some of the peer workers I work alongside, I've worked with for 21 years, day in and day out. You know, they're part of your family. So yes, there's lots of grief and loss, but at work in that role, my job is to make sure I'm giving my team and the people who receive services the supports they need.
How many are part of your team?
Well, the organization's got close to 1,000 employees now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Covering a whole bunch of
all kinds
different
of things. Super
obviously.
Dynamic organization. You know, at one time, we were very boutique and very grassroots, but the organization now is quite a large entity with different streams. So we have different streams of housing, different streams of shelters. We have a couple of recovery and treatment programs.
How
Yeah.
easy is it? I know one of the problems in the past was if people could manage to want to stop whatever, not necessarily drugs, but alcohol addiction issues,
Yep.
it would be hard to get rehab. What's happening? Like, has harm reduction kind of...
Well, harm reduction's cheaper than a rehab, so it's easier to pay for from a government perspective. Treatment beds and recovery is complex and expensive, and we are trying to get better at it, but we're not very good at it. It's really, well, we have a beautiful program called On-Site that's above In-Site, and it's 12 detox beds and some long-term transitional housing above that. And it's a place where people can walk into In-Site in the morning and go, I'd like to go upstairs and try today. And we see that as a success. The model there is quite unique. Fully detoxing and transitioning into recovery is not the only marker of success. If you want to break and you want to come up, that is success. If you can spend 3 days with us upstairs, 3 days out of the chaos, looking after yourself, that is success. So it's inch by inch. And geez, I don't know how many people have transitioned out of On-Site into long-term recovery, but it's got to be hundreds and hundreds. Like I don't know the number off the top of my head. And again, the model is very much like it's people like me that work there, that feel the same way about the community, that work there, that can't wait to see you when you come up. You know, we're excited to see you when you walk in the door and can't wait to hear about whatever crazy stuff you've been up to, and try and bring as much resources to that moment as we can.
So harm reduction, and one of the things from the conference, it was clear that harm reduction was bigger than supplying people with drugs or access to whatever addictions. It was like health. It was all the things we're talking about, housing, health. It's a health issue.
Yeah.
And that sometimes people need whatever substance, drugs in particular, to get beyond the intensity of needing it.
Yeah, the
wanting
hustle.
It, just having
Yeah,
it. You know, it all brings them down to a level.
Could you imagine if you were had high blood pressure or heart disease, and the medication that kept you going and out of harm's way, like simvastatin or one of the heart medications, was now illicit and expensive, and you had to hustle all day to make sure you had that medication, and what that would do to your sense of dignity, your sense of feeling like you belong in society. So much of what is harmful about drug use is the fact that it's criminalized. We know that. It's an evidence-based statement. We know it. So I work with PHS launching safe supply programs, and
what exactly does that mean?
well, safe supply is a regulated pharmaceutical alternative to illicit drugs. So street fentanyl versus sufentanil, which is like what you would get if you were palliative or in the ICU. You'd get that, like we're taking medications that are used in hospital for pain management, like with observation, and of course, like there's lots of regulatory bodies involved.
Right.
But like with the colleges on board and the pharmacy on board, and our incredible prescribing physicians who are absolute, the regulatory bodies have not made it easy for our docs. So I'm very grateful for them, all the incredible LPNs, and then all of the community members and the drug users who are involved in like letting us know what we need to do and how we need to do it. We're able to get a few substances out the door under prescription to folks who are now kind of like, I don't know if you remember Crosstown or the Naomi study, where opioid users were given regulated heroin, diacetylmorphine. Yeah, it's amazing what happens. Suddenly, they're not hustling all day, and they're not sick. They're stabilized.
They can eat maybe properly, start to think differently.
Well, they just, it gives them an opportunity to have some respite from that cycle, that really dangerous cycle of scoring illicit drugs through sex work, through crime, through whatever, and go like, oh, geez, I forgot I was, I'm a huge Toronto Blue Jays fan, and I'm going to have to take the time to watch the game now, and maybe I'm interested in, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to segue. Maybe I'm interested in getting to work in this community or employment or health or whatever. But I want to make it really clear that I don't see their trajectory of success being people are, using drugs and not using drugs and then suddenly looking middle class or whatever that, there's a real neoliberal look to what success is. And it's not how I feel about things at all. I think anyone that is putting themselves in less harm's way and able to have some joy and some rest is a good thing. I don't really give a shit whether they get a job at London Drugs and like pay their taxes. Sorry, that's not my, but it's not like, it's not the way I feel about the world. So I really, it's a wonderful thing to be able to provide service to folks and offer them medications that completely change their life.
And speaking of, you mentioned prostitutes, a lot of changes. Well, I don't know how much the laws went to the Supreme Court of Canada. I don't know what's happening there, but of course prostitution has been around forever. What's happening for the women in the down? Has anything changed in terms of, because I know in the early days they were picked up and put in jail, which this victimless crime they kept.
Yeah. Well, there are some agency-run housing for women only that are for women and self-identified women, including trans women, sex workers, where they can live and have mental health supports and also just be kept safe. There's, I think, one project like that in the downtown east side. There's 24-hour shelter, Wish has a 24-hour shelter, and is now providing harm reduction services there. Which is great, so the women don't have to leave to use drugs anymore. So I'm really proud of them for taking that step. The downtown east side is a dangerous place for women. We can have these services, but having to provide or perform illicit survival sex work to buy a substance that also might kill you, it's a dangerous place. I don't think it's any safer for women now than it was years ago. I don't see how it can be safe for women if everything they're involved in is criminalized.
And decriminalization is the way to go in terms of...
Well, I think I'd love to at least for it to be given a shot so we can evaluate it. It works well in other countries. We have a great team at the province working on this. We have an exemption into the federal government. To see if we can stop arresting people for carrying personal use. We always talk about, we have to destigmatize, and unless this is no longer a crime, it will always be stigmatized. People will always be lying to their bosses about their personal drug use because it's illegal and they can be fired, I would really like to be in a place where we can operate knowing that folks we're serving are not, we have nothing better to offer them, so they have to use the illicit market, and they're not being punished for it. And then I'd like to be in we need a compassion club model for drugs. Like we need it yesterday, we need it 10 years ago. But we need a place that is not medicalized, it doesn't require regulatory bodies like College of Physicians and Surgeons or the College of Pharmacists and licensing and all of these things that really, are log jams to anything being nimble. We need drug users who are experts in their own lives, running compassion clubs, providing safe regulated medications or drugs to other drug users, or majority of people who are dying of overdose in this province who are not necessarily physically dependent, or the term would be have a substance use disorder, but every now and then they like to do some cocaine or some heroin or some whatever, and they're dying in their parents' basements. Like, let's stop that. Let's have a place for them to buy it legally and take it home
and know what they're getting.
Yeah, and also where it's not criminalized, so that they feel like they can tell the person in their house that they are going to, think about what happened with alcohol use during Prohibition. How many people died of being poisoned? It's the same thing. How can it be okay for us to drink our faces off and smoke tobacco and now marijuana and not have it's just, the horrendous war on drugs, which really was about criminalizing people of color and not about the substances themselves. So, that's just, we're humans and we have big bureaucracies and we're ridiculous and we do terrible things. It's time for us to stop.
So what's happening now? Like, there are condos down there. New people are moving in there, right?
Yeah.
What is that sort of...
Gentrification, we knew it was coming in the early 2000s, and it really, by 2010, there was blocks of displacement. It's been a real tug of war. One block of Hastings, a whole bunch of really expensive businesses will open, and then they'll close. And COVID has really done some interesting things as well.
I didn't want to raise COVID.
Sorry.
And what effects? No, that's okay. And what effects it has. So I'm glad you brought it up.
COVID. There's a lot of people out on the street who might have housing, but they cannot have any of their friends or their community or their family in their housing anymore because of due to COVID protocols. We couldn't allow people to keep bringing a whole bunch of people into the building. And really, I think all of the agencies and the health authority have done an amazing job in the downtown east side. High rates of vaccination, very few major outbreaks, all sorts of physicians helping with risk mitigation prescribing to help people isolate. We've done a really good job. But that being said, there are very few places for people to gather that's allowed inside or safely. So, when you go along the street of East Hastings, you'll see a lot of gathering because there's nowhere else for people to gather. The downtown east side is much smaller than it used to be. It used to be however many blocks. Now it's about 8 or 6,
Okay.
So it's a bit of a,
Getting squished.
Yeah, it's a bit of a, you see lots of people. COVID's, was difficult, I think, and stressful for all the folks working in public health and in the non-NGO sector in the downtown east side. It was like, we're in the middle of an opioid crisis. We haven't got a handle on it. And now we're not able to even reverse overdoses with anything that might aerosolize the space. Like, it was really hard. It was hard for our staff not to use the tools they had to reverse overdoses because of the unknowns, Will we be spreading COVID? We didn't know, so we couldn't do it. But we know now, so we're good.
It's all good.
It's amazing what you learn, yeah.
How did the Woodwards building was a major project, and I think a happy one. I think, I'm not sure.
Oh, it's such a success.
Okay,
I love it.
Okay.
There was Woodwards is magical. The units are beautiful. I mean, there was so much hyperbole around our residents and what kind of trouble they were going to cause and blah blah blah, and the condo owners. Within the first year, 80% or more of the 9 calls to 911 were from the condo towers. We were just ticking along, doing our thing, and they were having wild parties and throwing cats out of windows. And they're we were, it turned out that we weren't the problem. There's such a, and there's all sorts of dialogue around the separate entrances, but the separate door for our social housing at Woodward's gives our residents the privacy they need to have some chaotic behavior and not be punished for it.
Be safe.
And be safe and know that it's not going to jeopardize their housing and the police aren't going to be called. And, and the shared area is wonderful. It's close to my office. I shop there all the time. There's often a piano, and many of our residents are piano. Like I see our residents playing piano in there. I go to Nestor's, and I run into people I know who live in the housing. It's an interesting community space, and I know that a lot of activists see it as, ground zero for gentrification, like that big bugger that really screwed us. But it really is a very, I think it's such a positive community. I love it. And I've lived in that. I've lived in the affordable housing in that, in one of the towers, and I loved it. So I love my neighbors. It was great.
I'm sure you have lots of stories, but you told me one of the stories that might surprise people when we talk about community support. And I've been in the downtown of Vancouver and see a man fall over, and nobody goes anywhere near the person. Tell me about I believe it was an old Volvo that the muffler died.
Yeah, it was one of those days, busy and challenging as usual, and I was late for picking up my kids from the after-school care. And nobody, really, there's no faster way to be unpopular with the people tasked with caring for your children is when you've got them there till 6:30 or something egregious like that. And I rushed out of the building I was in is this wonderful building called Smith Hewen, and it's 52 units of purpose-built housing for senior citizens with some drug use or substance use, but predominantly really psychiatrically unwell. They're my favorite group. I love them. They're colorful and they're hilarious. So I loved working there. So I would often be late, like I was rushing out, backed out with my 80s silver Volvo wagon, like every hippie mom has had one at one point or another. And my muffler fell off. And it just, like the whole thing fell off. So I stopped the car. I got out and I'm looking, I'm like, I don't know what that is. Oh shit. And then these two guys that were regulars in the laneway, in the alley, with a shopping cart, came running up. One of them used to be a mechanic. They were like immediately just got on the ground and helped me. And they like tied the muffler back on with some bits of metal they had in their cart, or like wire they had in their cart. Oh, no, sorry, they took the muffler off completely because it was dragging, and then they tied up the pipe thing that it was going to, and then they put down newspaper in the back of my car and then put the muffler on the newspaper. And I was like, and it happened really quickly, and I don't know them. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. And they're like, no problem. And I tried to give them some money, and they wouldn't take it. And I swear to God, it was like, I got to the daycare, I was like 15 minutes late instead of hours late. I was able to take my car into a shop and have a new muffler put on without it was sparking and dragging. That kind of stuff happens in the downtown east side all the time. If someone falls over or doesn't look well, everyone is checking on you. Everyone is checking in. Are you okay? Do you need anything? If someone falls over, the community of the downtown east side has always looked after itself. Everyone is trained. Everyone knows how to use naloxone. Everyone knows CPR. Everyone knows someone who does know it. Like there's such a cohesive community there, and people care. They know that like anywhere, like that is the one thing that keeps that community going is the level of care people have for each other, and for you as a stranger.
Well, when I used to sit in Pigeon Park, and the men or the women, Aboriginal usually, Indigenous, would sit there and I wouldn't have to worry. They would make sure nothing bad happened to me. And it was just incredible. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, it's really that way. And it doesn't mean that there aren't
bad things that happen.
Absolutely. But there's such abject and violent poverty in that community. And when people are living with that level of scarcity all the time, desperation drives people to do things they wouldn't do otherwise. And I'm not saying that some people in that community that access service aren't just bad people. I was going to say dicks, but but of course they are. They're everywhere.
But they're in our nice communities too.
They're everywhere, and there is so much good in all of that community. There's lots of good. Some of the best times, some of the best laughs I've ever had. So, yeah.
Thank you for doing this, Coco, and I have to end it with your Coco name. I have to.
Thank you, Patrice. It was such a pleasure, and thank you for being interested in that work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for an opportunity to tell the story.
It was so nice to have you express yourself, really. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to the Oceanwood Retreat. And thank you, Coco, so much for doing this.